With the continued rise of remote work and the increasing focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech industry, navigating these complex landscapes requires a unique blend of expertise, vision, and leadership. Our guest today embodies all these qualities and more. Today's guest's journey is a testament to the power of innovation and the importance of fostering a collaborative corporate culture. Welcome to Software Without Borders, the podcast where we explore the limitless potential of software in transforming businesses and industries across the globe. I'm your co-host, Jared Striner, and along with me, my co-host, Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerance. Today we have a special guest who is a seasoned professional with a remarkable background in software development, organizational strategy, and team leadership. Joining us is Patrick Mee. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Patrick started his career at Apple and has worked with complex production and business systems, championed SaaS transformations, and managed acquisitions. He's been an innovator in working with and hiring remote teams since 2008. He is committed to fostering talent and promoting diversity, where he has engaged in hiring, onboarding, mentoring, and furthering DEI initiatives. Patrick brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion. Patrick advocates for an agile management style, favoring a servant leadership approach. He believes in empowering engineers, clearing obstacles, and setting clear goals to motivate teams. With Patrick's background and experience, we hope you'll find a wealth of wisdom in today's episode. Before we dive in, please make sure to subscribe and leave a review if you find this discussion insightful. So Patrick, welcome to Software Without Borders. It's a pleasure to have you on this show. Can you start by giving our listeners a brief overview of your career journey and how you got into software development and organizational strategy?
Yeah. I got my degree in Ireland out of Dublin in the mid-90s. Ireland was just the pre-Celtic Tiger and pre-tech boom that people associate with Ireland now. I got a job down doing localization testing, which frankly is one of the most boring jobs that you could even imagine. I think you have to pop up an error message and make sure it's in German and it fits, right? And frankly, I can't believe I went to college for 4 years to do this, and I was actually just going to quit and go backpacking around Australia, like lots of Irish kids do. And literally the week I was going to get a visa, a green card to America dropped in my door. I won a green card in the lottery, in a green card lottery in Ireland. So I said I'd go to America instead. I bring that up because we'll talk about DEI, like fortune, right? Stuff that's out of your hand is really important. Like I've come to appreciate that, these kind of things I've had in my career, just pure fortune. If I hadn't won that green card and went backpacking around Australia, who knows where I'd be? Probably not here talking to you anyway. So I went to America. I didn't have so the company I was working for was Apple, a subsidiary of Apple. It was called Claris at the time. They didn't give me a job or transfer me, but they gave me a promise of an interview. So my narrative is that I came to America with $900 in my pocket. I had a couch to stay on for 4 weeks because of a friend of a friend. And in those 4 weeks, I had to get a job, get a place to stay, and get a car because I was in San Francisco. I didn't want to live down in Silicon Valley. And I managed to do it. I got the job, which then allowed me to get money to get a car, which then allowed me to get money to get a place to stay. So I worked at Apple on the FileMaker product, mainly doing internet. I started actually in QA, then I did international engineering on the FileMaker product and did some just regular application development there. I left in 1999. Anybody knows me will know this joke. I left because Apple sucked and had no future. And so, as I tell people, don't take stock advice from me. But it was a different time, different company, jobs just came back. But it was really the .com thing was kicking off, and I wanted to be part of that. We were doing some internet stuff, but the world was changing, and I was in the area, and I wanted to be part of it. So I left and did a few startups during that time. Got laid off a few times, but that was all part of the fun. Early 2000s, I was sort of transitioning into management. Probably after like 10 years of engineering. And I kind of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't be the manager that I'd had in my previous part of my career. It was very old school waterfall. I didn't know what it was called, but I just knew it wasn't working, and I knew working harder wasn't going to make things better, and better specs was, because I push, I'm going to have a better spec, but get a better spec, and we still never built the software that we should have built, right? So, and I was very committed to management being a trade, a skill, set of skills that you learn, right? It's not something you just, oh, I've been a coder for years and I'm just going to manage coders. Um, so I really studied, I really went and found books just in general management, right? Technical project management, manufacturing management. I was scouring back then. You get magazines like Dr. Dobbs. I used to actually go to the Dr. Dobbs magazine and read all the advertisement for books about management and buy the books and read them. And I actually came across, I sort of accidentally, one of the books I bought was a book by called Jim Highsmith. It was called Agile Ecosystems. And it was basically just a set of essays of people doing different ways of doing software development. And there was people doing this thing called Scrum. There was XP. There was Crystal Methods. There was a bunch of things, but it was, it wasn't selling the process. It was sort of selling, like, just talking about different ways of doing it. And I remember reading one chapter where there were sort of two chapters actually that made me sort of open my eyes. The big epiphany one was where somebody said, how about we actually ask the engineers how long stuff is going to take? Like, mind blowing. It's like we actually ask the people doing the work how long things are going to take. What a thought, right? And I've been so used to an environment where I'd sit with senior leader and they would, be plotting out my next month of work, or even people who weren't in the room plotting out their next 6 weeks of work. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of obvious. So I actually really, and there was other parts of it, and the one that really made me laugh in that book, there was one group who were actually building software development processes, which were for customers, which were top-down waterfall processes using these nascent agile methodologies. And they were asked, like, would you actually use the processes that you're selling? So, hell no, we'd never get anything done, right? But so I really actually threw myself into that rabbit hole. I joined local agile groups, got to know a lot of sort of the leaders in there, and really really embraced it. And again, back to fortune, right? It was fortune that this was the time that I was moving into management. It was fortune that this change of style was happening, because it really resonated with me. I was never the smartest in the room. I was never the most dominating in the room. I was not the blood and thunder leader who just outmuscled everybody. I had always been the person who was helping onboard new people. I was the one mentoring interns. I was the one, if I didn't understand why we were building something, I built a relationship with marketing and sales. I got to know the people over there and I said, tell me why we're doing this. So it always was sort of people orientated. And this, to me, sort of the agile, sort of really focuses back on the individual, the team, the people. I have a whole bunch of principles that I've sort of built upon that, if you want me to elaborate in that later. So I was very fortunate, and in my first job, I actually did an agile transformation in my, I was just a line manager in just one team, and completely turned things around, right? And it was kind of funny because nobody knew what agile was, and there was a lot of resistance, like, what do you mean you don't know what your engineers are doing for the next month? I don't know what they're doing for the next month, but I'll know what they'll have done next week when they give me a demo and we give them feedback. And I had one person, hopefully he never listens to this, says, like, how can you call yourself a manager if you don't know this stuff? And I was like, yeah, this is what I do not want to be, right? It was an interesting one because it was nearly overnight. The productivity, the morale, the attrition of the engineering department started dropping as I took on more and more. And it actually escalated all the way up to the exec team, where I was presenting to the execs and basically telling them, you're doing this wrong. Like, you can't change prioritization willy-nilly every day. You got to have a goal. You got to prioritize. You can't say yes to everything. because all the mistakes you're making are manifesting in the people actually doing the work, and you're pointing at them, but it's all upstream. And it sort of makes me laugh. Like, the hell did I think I was? As a first time manager, less than a year under my belt, telling the exec team how to do their jobs. Um, but I left there as a director. Like, so it worked. It really, and it was kind of funny. People used to call it sort of Patrick's process. I didn't tell him otherwise. Why? um, so, so that was a big part of my career, really sort of embracing sort of the agile principles and beliefs. Um, the next stage was actually part of that journey was the dogma at the time, and there is a lot of dogma in agile, was, it could only happen with people sitting beside each other. And there was people advocating for, you have to have a desk. You can get a desk with wheels on it and portable power stations, and you wheel the desk to the people you're working with, and you move to the office is constantly moving. Like, I get it, sounds like fun, or not. But I didn't buy it. I believed that this could work, the principles could work in a remote environment. I don't know why. I have a little bit of a anti-establishment vibe to me, and I like to be a bit of a contrarian. So for some reason, I said, well, that's the challenge I want to take on next, right? So I actually found a company that was actually built like an open source company, and that company was SourceForge, which, if you've been been around long enough, that was sort of GitHub for open source before GitHub. And they basically had fully remote and distributed teams. We had some people in the office in Mountain View, but large part of the team is actually scattered all over North America, including Canada. Um, and it was a public company. So we had SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley stuff to deal with as well. So it was a pretty constrained environment. It had not embraced sort of agile really. But I believed I could get it working. And then after my few years there, I actually turned, a team that was doing okay into, I believe, effective agile teams. And that really sort of nailed home to me that agile could work in a remote environment. Like, the principles and practices apply. It's a bit different, right? Back then, we didn't have Zoom. We actually had a conference call, like a phone number we would dial into our stand up. And our demos will be done on a little portable MacBook, which people would VNC into and then share their own screen on it. So, we didn't have the tech, right?
Yeah.
But the principles applied. And
Hey, Patrick.
so,
Um,
yeah, sorry.
yeah, so I wanted to just sort of transition into that. So your journey from engineer to manager, from waterfall to agile, and these couple of decades of experience and knowledge, and some of the knowledge that you picked up along the way. I've known you for about 10 years now, and you're a major contributor to the book Synergia, and one of the reasons that really attracted me to your way of thinking was what you were doing as executive vice president of engineering at Nextrol. I would love to hear from you through taking this evolutionary journey that you had. Describe a little bit about what Nextrol does, but also describe sort of what the environment was before they attempted or you helped them put together a framework for distributed agile development.
Yeah, so Nextrol is like internet marketing. They've got two divisions, AdRoll and Nextrol. I just, for transparency, I left there last summer to start in a new job, snapdocs.com. So they, so there was it was a right, like, it was a good company, good culture, very culture orientated, good engineering, good leaders there. So I'll be selective in where I join. Right, I've been doing this long enough. I think I've earned that right. So, so for the agile principles and method, it was a ripe environment. What they there was everybody was on site. Everybody in San Francisco. It was a very San Francisco company. The founders were all not from San Francisco, but their careers had matured and developed in San Francisco. So very sort of cultured like that. And I had pushed for remote engineers, not near sourcing. That was a further journey down the road, but it was actually just be able to hire people outside of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a resistance at the executive team, and mainly around culture.
Mm.
They were worried about breaking the culture. So what I did was I flew in 3 engineers who worked for me at previous company, and one of them had worked for me two companies. And I said to the CEO, who was technical, product person, and the head of product, and the CTO, I said, spend a day with these 3 guys. Let me know what you think. At the end of the day, we want to hire these 3 guys. Like, I said, what about the remote culture? No, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's that these are good people,
Yeah.
right? They explained how I've done remote working, how people, the culture matters, right? The individuals matter. Like all the stuff that I talked about, we can do it remotely. And they're brilliant engineers. I think the 3 of them are all director and VP level now. They're brilliant engineers, great people, and being able to just show and have them advocate, and explain how it works, just really sort of overcome the barriers. So I actually did hire the 3 of those and a bunch of other people from previous companies, and then gained the credibility, and then started hiring wider. And then, this was 2015, right? One of the sort of unwritten rules that they don't really tell you about being a VP of engineering is if you don't scale your team, you're going to get fired.
Mm-hmm.
You got to hire, right?
Sure.
They never write that as your number one job description, but if you can't hire as a VP of engineering, you're losing your job. Like, that's it. And I was hitting a wall, right? Just being able to hire the scale I wanted. And then that's where Andy and I got introduced. And then the near sourcing part of my career, which was new to me, started.
So describe a little bit about how that program kicked off and what sort of principles you put in place. Because I thought your principles were very innovative and proactive. A lot of companies don't really commit to it the way you did, and the way you documented it, and the way you introduced this culture to the co-located people at Nextroll. So describe a little bit about that.
Yeah, like I often find it hard to describe it, because to me that's just doing, right? It's
Sure.
just doing. And then when I tell people, oh wow, that's a new way of thinking, I would have thought everybody would think like that. So if I'm not hitting the mark, Andy, maybe you can sort of get me back to the stuff that you want me to talk about. But again, like I'll talk about my principles, right? Like pushing responsibility down to the people doing the work, right? The engineers, whoever's doing the work, they know more about it than you, so trust them, right? But you got to give them clear goals. You got to give them the tools. You got to show them what the constraints are, and then get the F out of their way. Like, that's pretty obvious to me, right? Another principle is shortening the feedback loop, right? That's why I run 1 week sprints, right? Like in Scrum, I don't do Scrum capital S, but Scrum-like, right?
Mm-hmm.
But feedback loops, like, most companies now are doing 2 week sprints. So you get 26 demos a year, 26 retrospectives a year. I said, let's do 52 of those a year.
Yeah.
Like, that's more feedback and that's more demos, right? But that's an example of putting it into the feedback loop. And sort of tying those together is give freedom, but inspect frequently.
Great.
Right? So to me, is like you got short feedback loops. So you don't need to be paying attention all the time. You don't need to be micromanaging. They're going to do a week of work and you're going to learn from it. And if it turns out it wasn't good, really, with all the meetings and stuff, you've probably only lost 3.5 days of work or something like that. But you've learned something, right? And which goes into my 4th principle is continuous improvement. Always try to be improving. Every opportunity is an opportunity to improve. The postmortems, retrospective. Like what I said there is if they go on the wrong track for 3.5 days, great, we've learned something. Let's not do that again, right? Let's make mistakes. Let's make more and more interesting mistakes. I don't want the same boring mistakes. So those are kind of the principles that I sort of put in. And I explain to people, like, every action, everything you see, you should be able to tie it back to one of those 4 principles. And again, you can go layers and layers underneath it, right? Like I said, I really care for the individual, right? I want engineers to remember why we got into this. Like we would have done this for free. We were doing it for free as hobbyists most of the time. And like we get paid for it. And then corporate and process and all that stuff takes down and takes the joy out of it. I want to like make this fun again, right? So, and again, that's pushing responsibility down to the person doing the work. But to do that, you got to set up the right culture and environment. So those are the principles. And again, back to it, they apply whether you're co-located or not, right? The big thing that I needed to break for the remote part, I had to really, the culture can't be that the in-office people are the first-class citizens and the remote people are the second-class citizens. You can't have that. And frankly, the worst environment is the worst way to start, which is kind of often where we are now, is having a team where you have some people on site and some people remote. I always advocated for that because I'm never advocating 100% fully remote. I'm advocating build the best teams where you can build the best teams. So if you have people in San Francisco, that's great. If people in South America, that's great. I always try to, when teams were nascent and new to this, if possible, I try and have everybody co-located or a team of everybody remote. Everybody's on the same level ground. It's harder when you got the one remote appendage because they get left out. They're not in the conversations. So you have to be very, very deliberate about that. So I try to ban the words like, remote or ban the word contractor, like unless those are the topics, like how many people do we have in the office? But it's not like, oh, they're remote, so we'll just give them the crappy work, right? They have to be a full 100% first-class citizen. And that's after a cultural thing because I think there's just a norm where, again, the San Francisco, the US, frankly, is like we do the hard work here and we outsource elsewhere. Now that is changing, right? Dublin is a tech hub now, and it's moved beyond just doing localization QA, what I did. But they're actually building stuff, which is great to see. That actually makes me very happy. But to me, that like all those other principles apply. But now you really got to be conscious of the fact that the people who are remote are actually first-class citizens. So here's an example. If I see, two engineers sort of chatting in the office and they're chatting about a problem, and I go, would you mind going actually sitting down and typing it in to have that conversation on Slack? Just so the rest of your team can see the conversation, so they can be part of it, so they can learn from it. Even if there's two other people are in San Francisco, they get to see the conversation and maybe part of it. Like, not everything needs to be like that, but if this is something your team could benefit from, have the conversation in Slack. Another actually thing that I learned a lot, and is it's a bit of a contentious idea and it may be self-serving. What I found actually when I had remote engineers, people lamented the lack of whiteboarding, right? Oh, we can't whiteboard like we used to. And I remember just watching a lot of times, I see on-site people that go in there and they're whiteboarding and I come out like, what happened to it? No, we just had a conversation. Was that the best use of our time? What I noticed with remote people was when they wanted to bring an idea, they couldn't whiteboard, right? And the cost of communication is high. You got to schedule a call. You can't just walk over. You got to get people a meeting room. If there's people on site, you got to find a room and get them in it. So the cost of initiating a communication, say whiteboarding session is much higher. But what I noticed was the quality of what they were presenting was much higher because they realized they actually had to get to the stage of why should we not do this? Whereas the whiteboarder people that go in, oh, I have an idea that's popped into my head. Let's talk about it for an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
And then at the end, it's like, that was dumb. Right. So to me, I found actually the cost of communication forced a higher quality communication. And that's what I really appreciate with the remote folks that come and propose it. It's like, I'm looking at to say, why are we not doing this? As opposed to basically helping them think through all the basic stuff that they should have worked out, earlier, which I see on site happening remote. So, or on site, a lot of cycles wasted for somebody could have sat down for 20 minutes on their own and sort of thought through all these.
That's a fantastic insight right there. And it's a unique insight. I really haven't heard it before, but it makes so much sense.
Wait, so I'm getting to where you want me to go.
Well, Patrick, is really interesting when you started talking about the beginning of your career. You and I flip flopped. So I actually started out, didn't technically backpack, but I worked on cruise ships for 2.5 years as one of my
Nice.
first jobs out of college, and then I did QA work. So I
Okay.
kind of flip flopped. So it's like, wait a second, that sounds really, really, really familiar.
Have you got the fun 2.5 years? I
Yeah,
didn't.
but once again, it's one of those things where I was not in the office with everybody else. That I was out there by myself, and the things with issues that you have to deal with over a time discrepancy, and also trying to figure out something technically pre-internet. I'm not like going to Google if something breaks, or I got to wake somebody up if something happens. For me, it's the middle of the day, then it's the middle of the night. But for me, it's just like, okay, this really sounds very familiar. I know how this is. And yes, sometimes QA is not the most fun thing in the world, but you have done some very interesting things through your career. And, I used to work in a SaaS environment myself, and you've managed complex production systems and champion transformations into SaaS. But what lessons did you learn there from, dealing with things that where people were just like, maybe they were hesitant to do this, and how do you get them to kind of listen and understand that this is the best thing that we can do?
So what I coach my teams and anybody who wants to listen to me, um, is anytime you're trying to change a person or an organization, you have to look at it from their point of view and say, how am I gonna come at it this better? And I realized I sort of got that back from uh, Covey's, 7 effective habits, or I think it's one of those items in there that I didn't realize how much I'd actually internalized. Um, but it's always like if I'm giving somebody negative feedback or constructive feedback, it's like I want them walking out of that conversation going, I'm glad I had that conversation because I'm going to be better at my job. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be more effective. I'm very honest with people. I'll say, listen, your resume will be better. Like, for example, I'll tell someone, your resume is going to be better if we do this. I guarantee it. Your career will be better. You'll find a better job after here because of this. And that's kind of the attitude I have. I do that from a IC to a team department. Always trying to look at it from their point of view is how is this going to help them improve? Um, you talk about SaaS transformation. I did, like, say, one company I was at. Um, we had hard, like we'd iron, on racks down in Santa Clara and people up and down. It was really old school, and our deployment for engineering from my engineering team was just this laborious process that started at 7 at night. It could finish at midnight. The engineers weren't actually ones doing the releases. It was the ops people doing the releasing the software onto these servers, because this was sort of pre-DevOps. Um, and I was going, this is nuts. Like, we have to be able to release the software in the middle of the day at our busiest period and do it without fear. And that was my goal. This before I knew OKRs, but that was my goal. We are releasing our software at 12 o'clock noon every day without fear and without disruption. And to that, I had to do huge, like, and again, this was 15 odd years ago, right? Um, so like one of the big things I had to do was actually build a trust with the ops team, right? Because if back then the way it was, if the ops teams, they were responsible for the stability of the system. So the easiest way to keep the system stable was never to release software, right? Like that's if humans aren't there changing things, computers don't break themselves, right? Um, so what I had to make a commitment, I say, listen, we are going to release the software. All I ask is you give us the sandbox where we release it. When we break things, we're accountable. We're responsible. We'll ask your help to fix it, but it's not you. You should not be releasing our software. And if we get good at this, you don't have to be wasting your time releasing our software. You'll be off doing more important stuff as opposed to trying to debug our crappy deployment scripts, right? And my engineers are not learning anything by you debugging their crappy deployment scripts. They got to learn, right? And that was in a situation where, and I had to build the relationships and trust with the ops people. There was a lot of work sort of that went into it beforehand, before they sort of pulled that trigger or allowed. But again, it gets back to, I was able to convince them that this is good for the ops team, it's good for engineering. Let's try it. And then a few years later, people are writing books about DevOps, and I go, damn it, I could have wrote that book. Like, so, yet another opportunity where I actually might have been a little bit ahead of the curve. So I don't know if that touches upon what you're looking for, but it's, again, when you're trying to make change, like it's the win-win situation. Like that's definitely one of the Covey's principles, right? Try and make everything win-win. I'm not, and again, back to my agile, what agile resonated with me. I'm not a dog eat dog person. I'm not a zero-sum person. I believe we can work together and both come out positive. And let's get all corporate. 1+1 can equal 3. So.
We at Accelerance also embrace a lot of the same principles. We're a 7 habits follower in our values. We're a 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah.
And you talk about empowerment and clearing obstacles and motivating people, leading with servant leadership. But that begins obviously with a vetting process, trying to find and vet the right individuals and talent, and also the identification of people that aren't a good fit relatively quickly. So you have these guardrails, right, that you're operating within. Can you talk a little bit about how you hopefully set yourself up for success? What have you learned, and how has that success increased? Once can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's like there's an element like, so one, you got to have your culture, right? And I'm not a huge one for, every company has their company values and all that. And like, I've been in companies where I look at it and go, yeah, I think we might do 2 out of those 5, right?
Sure.
I'm very much, but like, culture is what you do, right? And again, I'm not a sociologist, but like, to me, is like, it's what you do. And in the hard times, do you walk the walk, right? So for me, you got to build that culture and be able to talk, with leadership, with ICs, etc., and say like, this is the culture for our organization, and should be able to throw out catchphrase. I'm not going to put it on the wall, but like, no blame culture, right? Like that's where I want, if other people are talking about the department, that's what I want to hear them say, right? So there's an element you sort of have to have that sort of squared away, right? But when it comes to like the hiring of people, I'm actually quite regimented in my process here. We can talk about DEI and bias. There was a great book I read, Thinking Fast and Slow, Christensen, I think it was. And I love that book because, if we get into the DEI stuff, I explain where that was in it. But like, there was a chapter in it where they were basically assessing the training of officers, the interview process of officers for the Israeli army, and then they did a review of the process. That there was no correlation between how they tested for the officers and versus success in their job. And he proposed, how about we actually test them for the skills they need, as opposed to having running up and down mountains with logs, with 4 people carrying a log or something like that. And that sort of was like an epiphany. I was going like, yeah, it's like, that makes sense. So actually, I did this at my last company, and we started a program. And I say program because it's an ongoing thing. We basically identified like, what are the skills engineers need to do and actually need to do at this job, at this company. And when you're interviewing for an interview, you're often like, can you please design this system? Frankly, 90% of your time, you're working on other people's code in a system that's already built. So you got to learn how to refactor code. You got to learn how to do testing. You got to be able to do debugging, right? So we actually identified all the skills. And then what I did was built interview panels with questions. The questions were actually very heavily documented. And to reduce bias, we actually said we would be very clear with the candidate. Here is the problem. Here's what success looks like. Here is how long you have to take it. I, as the interviewer, will be here to answer any questions, and I'll be as interactive as you want. I do not need to hear your thought process. We're trying to simulate a work environment. We're giving you one test. There's only one thing, debugging or test. And you involve me as much or as little as you need. Your interaction with me is not going to be judged. We're going to judge the quality of your code. And to me, like there's a few things in there, right? The bias of we only test for one thing, right? The horns and halo bias. They, if they do well on one and bad on the other, they could be judged for bad on both or good on both, right? So that's why it's very specific to one. But to me, this whole crap about we got to hear their thought process. But that's like, first of all, who wants to be sitting down beside somebody who's then talking out loud? Well, I'm going to write a loop here because of X, Y. Like, you shoot yourself. Like that's not real,
For sure,
right?
yeah.
And that's adding stress to the environment. But humor aside, all you're doing is looking for confirmation bias. Is somebody thinking the same as me, right? And we're like, what about somebody who's shy? What about people who English as a second language? Like you're already dinging them straight away. So very, very regimented in my process. And then at the end, we have a soft skill, behavioral style interview with the manager, and we have predefined scenarios like conflict resolution, receiving feedback, innovation, and then we'll have a bunch of predefined questions. And that's where the skill is for the manager to interview them. And we actually then train all of our engineers. There's a program that's constantly going. We're constantly training people about this process, how to be a good unbiased engineer. We train them on unconscious bias, all of that kind of stuff. So we're very, very regimented.
Where does that training come from? I mean, like, how do you?
I built it internally. We built it. I built a program.
Wow.
And it's literally a program where we had me and 3 other engineers, and people cycle through it. And we're just constantly getting new questions. We'd sign up, we'd do a training every 6 months. We built, when I say we, they,
Yeah, of course.
they built it. But it like literally is a program. And it's still ongoing, even though they're not hiring much, because when I left, we weren't hiring much, but I said, like, this is the time to get the kinks out of the process until it's going to come back. So now that's a really important thing to me. And the part that you actually said there, Andy, I'm actually not so worried about the bad hire. I'm worried about the good one that got away, because you won't know. You don't know, because you've got a feedback loop saying that it made a good or bad hire. But if your interview process is rejecting good people, you don't have that feedback loop. You don't know if they went on and had a successful career or not. You're not doing that. Nobody does that analysis.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm always erring on, if we make a bad hire, we can fix that, right? If we miss the good hire,
yeah, it's gone.
That's a done deal. You can't undo that.
Yeah.
So that's where I like to, and that's why I want to have it as regimented as possible.
Sure.
And then I can see the rejections. I go, is that a bias thing?
Yeah.
Or is it a factual thing, right? And it's easier when you're doing it, when you have it really regimented and constantly doing
Brilliant.
it.
Yeah.
That was a great book, Patrick. I read that a while back. Somebody introduced me to it. And, the thing you said about the military made me laugh. It reminded me of, I swam in college, and I used to joke around. I'm like, why am my race is 20 seconds long. Why am I training for 2 hours? Why don't we do something shorter or faster? Because that's what I want to do. Andy could definitely say the same. Why did I just skate for 3 hours when the game is only this long?
Yeah.
But it does go back to the whole piece of just looking at what is the important thing to look at and how much time should we spend on it, and which is always important, because people always expect, oh, I'm going to get this. I need this in 3 hours. Well, it's impossible to get this done 3 hours because of the processes and getting ahead of the game. To do that, I ran a help desk early in my career, and there was no standard on repair. And what we had to do is actually, instead of everyone just getting up and leaving their desk and going to figure it out, we actually put out a whole set of rules that said, this type of repair will take X amount of business days, and because we might have to order parts. And once that went out, they understood that, well, now I know how long something's going to take. This is not Amazon. You're not going to get it between 5 and 10 p.m. if you spend $25 or more on something. And if you had that in your career where once you spelled it out for people, then they finally understood that, okay, this is what I'm going to expect coming into something versus I need this now, and it's an impossible time frame for people.
Yeah, that's pretty standard in software development. Like that's the job. again, the beauty of the 1 week sprints, it actually takes the anxiety away. Like I say, you can sort of break stuff. I really
So
believe
true.
people can, have a week of work. I know what a week of work feels like.
Yeah.
So you can actually much better planning and predictability and just constantly repetition, you get better at it. So there's ways. So that's one of the benefits. There is an analogy that I do use, though, especially with other execs, that can say, you know, especially with San Francisco orientated, right? Where, like, how long? I asked them, like, how long does it take to drive from San Francisco to LA? And like, you take 6-8 hours, with depending, right? I says, well, you've just come to ask me to go to San Francisco LA in 3 hours. Right. So you tell me the solution to that, right? And then we can have a conversation. Well, okay, maybe we'll get a helicopter. Right. Now we can actually have a conversation. Just wanting something to happen doesn't make it a reality. So I always try to bring sort of analogies, real world analogies and examples. When I say this, like what you've asked is like to drive from San Francisco in my, Fiat Punto, in 3.5 hours. I was like, I love the goal, but what we have ain't going to get us there. So can we reframe the goal? Can we, have a conversation about that? So there's sort of this, like, again, metaphors and analogies sort of help with people who aren't sort of technical. But also, yeah, so the process is the transparency is important. That's, and again, the 1 week sprints that gives you a much more of a heartbeat of what's going on, allows you to adapt. A lot of time, those pressures where somebody says, I need it now, really what they're saying is, I can't have it on your backlog because, I know it might only take you 2 days, but it'll be 6 months before you start working on it. If you actually have good transparency into your backlog and ability to slide stuff in,
Sure.
that takes anxiety away. And anxiety is a lot of the problems where people just worry that if I can't get it now, if I can't force it through now, I'll never get it. And if you have actually developed a reputation, ability to be predictable in your delivery, people are going to give you a pass. They'll say, yeah, actually, I don't need it now. But like, you think you'll have it done in 2 weeks? Yeah. And it's like, okay. And if you've demonstrated that ability.
Yeah.
So those are kind of, again, they range from processes to storytelling and anecdotes and all that kind of stuff. So
You've gone through a lot of evolution. Have you, over the last year or 2 years, what sort of epiphanies or additions have you made that is memorable, or and not to say that none of us have reached our apex. We just continue to learn and evolve, and so does the marketplace and the environment around us. But
yeah,
can you think of any?
It's an, I don't know, is it this me, like, I don't think it's necessarily me of evolving, but in my previous job, I actually got moved on to the business. I took over all of our business systems and actually got really involved in how the business works. And really, because in product and engineering, like, and design, like, there's the three people and you work out the process together and you sort of, whatever tension it is, but like, you can work it out. It's a closed system, right? I really came to appreciate how hard cross-organizational projects, initiatives are. And it's an area that I've become quite interested in. And I can, obviously lots of other people have, because you see how many SaaS tools are out there about how do we get data from one part of the company to the other to make informed decisions. All the automation tools like Zapier and all of these kind of tools, Asana, like, they're trying to help organizations of cross-functional groups achieve goals. So I've been reading a lot, like, stuff like, again, and I've read them before, but they were kind of, okay, like OKRs now. I'm actually really leaning in heavily at them at the company level. I'm trying to get company level OKRs. Because they were trying to do goal setting, but it was very much each department set their own goals, and I come in and go, well, where's the leadership goals? Where's the company OKRs? And there wasn't any. So I'm trying to bring in the process where we actually have to have common goals, and then you layer down your OKRs or goals across that, and then you can actually have alignment conversations. So that's the stuff that I'm actually quite interested in spending a lot of my time on, is how do we actually get like the operations of running a company. Because again, I've really seen it a lot where a lot of companies focus on, there's the sales side, right? And the other end is the product side.
Sure.
And in the middle is the operations, and it kind of, oh, it'll just take care of itself.
Sure.
And, you know, companies like Amazon, they're just an operational beast. Like they're just amazing. And obviously one of the best companies, you know, strong, you know, define best, but like one of the more successful companies in the world. So I'm actually, you know, reading books about, you know, studying how Amazon do these kind of things and trying to incorporate them into my job
Definitely.
now. And I spend as more time, frankly, outside of engineering, and like I'm trying to like have my engineering managers and product managers focus on operational metrics that are geared towards our customers. So trying to get away from delivery of features, but actually delivery of value, and value that can actually be measured, and not just focusing on like the output metrics like revenue and cost of goods sold, but actually what are the input metrics that actually you can influence, that actually can change. And I had like a meeting this morning where, you know, I came up with a crazy product idea because I was actually just focusing on some input metrics, and I'm going like, you know, if we follow this down, we could actually end up doing a marketing campaign about this. Now, whether we do or not, like, that's out of my hands, but it actually allowed me, you know, I was thinking about how do we help our operations team be more successful, and their success, their definition of success is having better customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
And I came up with some ideas, and I was like, but I need my engineering managers thinking about that as opposed to just, we need to ship a feature
Sure.
and another feature and another feature. So that's where I was doing spend time. I mean, kind of interested, curious. Like it's not a new field. Like, you know, Drucker was doing it years ago. But it's an area for me that personally that I, you know, I was so sort of in the engineering and product delivery and cocoon that this is a new world to me. It's going, wow, this is actually hard and complex. It's fun. So that's kind of where a lot of my, you know, I've been doing the engineering and product stuff. You know, I've been doing it nearly 30 years. So,
Well, I
yeah, I
have
got the,
a whole list of questions that I'm not going to be able to ask lined up because I know we're getting close to time. Jarrett, I think we wanted to. I'll leave you for the transition.
yeah. And I do, sorry, just before, I hope I didn't ramble it too much. I love talking about this stuff. So, yeah, you got me going. So.
That brings us to the end of another insightful episode of Software Without Borders. Today we hope you enjoyed our conversation with Patrick Mee and gained valuable insights into the power of innovation and the importance of fostering a collaborative corporate culture. Patrick, thank you once again for sharing your expertise and inspiring our listeners. We hope you found today's conversation as inspiring and as enlightening as we did. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Software Without Borders. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed today's episode. Your feedback helps us bring you more relevant and valuable content. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with software.